Greetings, listeners, and welcome to another episode of History of the Popes, where we delve into the lives and legacies of the successors of Saint Peter, those who have shaped the course of the Catholic Church and, often, the world around it. Today, we turn our attention to a figure who, though lesser known than some of his successors, holds a significant place in the early history of the papacy. Pope Victor I, who reigned from roughly 189 to 199 AD. Victor's pontificate, though brief by modern standards, was marked by moments of bold leadership, cultural complexity, and decisions that reverberated through the early Christian world. As we explore his life, we'll situate him in the vibrant, often perilous context of the late 2nd century, a time when Christianity was still finding its footing in a Roman world that was both hostile and curious. Let's begin by setting the stage. The late 2nd century was a tumultuous period for Christians. The Roman Empire, under emperors like Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, was a sprawling, diverse realm where religious practices were as varied as the peoples it governed. Christians, still a small but growing minority, were often misunderstood, sometimes tolerated, but frequently persecuted. The Church itself was not a monolithic institution, but a network of communities scattered across cities like Rome, Antioch, Alexandria, and Carthage. These communities shared a common faith in Christ, but differed in their practices, their liturgical traditions, and even their interpretations of sacred texts. It was a time of fluidity, of debate, and of defining what it meant to be Christian. Into this world steps Victor, traditionally regarded as the first African pope, though we must approach such labels with care. The sources for Victor's life are sparse, as is typical for figures of this era. We rely primarily on early church historians like Eusebius of Caesarea and the Liber Pontificalis, a later compilation of papal biographies that, while valuable, is not always historically precise. What we do know is that Victor was likely born in the Roman province of Africa, perhaps in a city like Carthage or Leptis Magna, regions known for their cultural richness and intellectual vitality. Victor's background, then, places him in a cosmopolitan world where Latin, Greek, and local languages mingled, and where Christianity was beginning to take root alongside other religious traditions. Victor's election as Bishop of Rome, around 189 AD, came at a time when the role of the Pope was still evolving. The term Pope itself was not yet in common use. Victor would have been known simply as the Bishop of Rome, a position that carried significant moral authority, but not the centralized power we associate with the papacy today. The Bishop of Rome was, in a sense, a first among equals, presiding over a community that saw itself as the heir to Peter and Paul, both martyred in the city. Yet, Victor's leadership style suggests he was not content to be a mere figurehead. He was a man of action, willing to assert Rome's influence in ways that were bold and, at times, controversial. One of the defining moments of Victor's pontificate was his role in the Quartodeciman controversy, a dispute that reveals much about the challenges of unifying a diverse church. The controversy centered on the date of Easter, a question that might seem trivial today but was profoundly significant for early Christians. In Asia Minor, many Christian communities followed the practice of the Quartodecimans, those who celebrated Easter on the 14th day of the Jewish month of Nisan, regardless of the day of the week, in keeping with the timing of Passover. This tradition, rooted in the Gospel accounts of the Last Supper, was cherished by many, particularly in churches founded by the Apostle John. In Rome and other Western communities, however, the custom was to celebrate Easter on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the spring equinox, emphasizing the resurrection over the Passover connection. Victor, as Bishop of Rome, took a firm stance in favor of the Sunday celebration. He saw the Quartodeciman practice as out of step with the majority of Christian communities and, perhaps, as a potential source of division. His response was decisive. He sought to enforce uniformity across the Church. According to Eusebius, Victor convened synods in Rome and encouraged other bishops to do the same in their regions, asking them to clarify their practices regarding Easter. The majority aligned with Rome's position, but the churches of Asia Minor, led by figures like Polycrates, Bishop of Ephesus, staunchly defended their Quartodeciman tradition, citing apostolic precedent. What followed was a dramatic escalation. Victor, in a move that some scholars see as a landmark assertion of Roman primacy, issued a letter declaring that those who persisted in the Quartodeciman practice were to be excommunicated. This was no small matter. Excommunication meant cutting off entire communities from fellowship with the broader church, a severe step that risked fracturing the fragile unity of early Christianity. Victor's decision was met with resistance, most notably from Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyons and a towering figure in early Christian theology. Irenaeus, himself a native of Asia Minor, urged Victor to reconsider, arguing that differences in practice did not undermine the unity of faith. He pointed out that earlier bishops of Rome, like Anicetus, had disagreed with the Quartodecimans but maintained communion with them. Irenaeus's intervention likely tempered Victor's approach, and while the sources are unclear on the final outcome, it seems the excommunications were not fully enforced. The Quartodeciman practice gradually faded, but Victor's actions left a lasting impression. This episode raises fascinating questions about Victor's legacy. Was he a visionary leader, seeking to forge a unified church in a fragmented world? Or was he overreaching, imposing Roman authority in a way that alienated others? The truth, as is often the case, likely lies in between. Victor's insistence on uniformity reflects a growing sense of the Roman Church's role as a centre of authority, a precursor to the later development of papal primacy. Yet his approach also reveals the limits of that authority in an era when bishops across the Christian world saw themselves as equals, guided by their own apostolic traditions. The Quartodeciman controversy, then, is not just about a date on the calendar, but about the tension between unity and diversity, a theme that would echo through centuries of church history. Beyond the Easter controversy, Victor's pontificate is notable for other contributions, though the evidence is less clear. Tradition credits him with promoting the use of Latin in the Roman liturgy, a significant shift in a church that was still heavily Greek-speaking. If true, this move would have aligned the Roman Church more closely with the Latin-speaking culture of the Western Empire, laying the groundwork for the Latin tradition that would dominate Western Christianity for centuries. However, the sources for this claim, primarily the Liber Pontificalis, are late and not entirely reliable, so we must treat it with caution. Still, the idea of Victor as a bridge between the Greek and Latin worlds is compelling, given his likely African origins and his role in a cosmopolitan city like Rome. Victor's pontificate also unfolded in a context of sporadic persecution. While the reign of Commodus was relatively lenient compared to earlier periods, Christians in Rome still faced suspicion and occasional violence. Victor himself is traditionally listed among the martyr popes, though there is no definitive evidence that he died a martyr's death. The Liber Pontificalis claims he was martyred, but earlier sources like Eusebius are silent on this point. It's possible that later traditions embellished his story to align him with the heroic narrative of early Christian martyrs. Whether he died naturally or violently, Victor's leadership in such a precarious environment speaks to his courage and conviction. As we reflect on Victor's legacy, we see a figure who embodies the complexities of the early church. He was a man of his time, navigating a world where Christianity was still defining itself against the backdrop of a vast and often hostile empire. His African background reminds us of the diversity of the early Christian movement, which drew strength from the many cultures it embraced. His bold stance on the Easter controversy, while controversial, underscores the challenges of forging unity in a decentralized church. And his role in promoting Latin in the liturgy hints at his influence on the church's cultural identity. Victor's story, though obscured by the mists of history, invites us to consider the delicate balance between authority and communion, between tradition and adaptation. His pontificate, brief though it was, marks a step in the long journey of the papacy from a local episcopal office to a global institution. As we close this episode, we're left with a sense of admiration for this early Bishop of Rome, a man who, in the face of division and uncertainty, dared to lead with conviction. His legacy, like that of so many early popes, is not in grand monuments or sweeping reforms, but in the quiet, steadfast work of building a church that could endure. Thank you for joining me today on History of the Popes. Next time we'll continue our journey through the early centuries of the Church, exploring another figure who shaped its path. Until then, may we all find inspiration in the courage and complexity of those who came before us. Farewell.